So thanks for joining. My name is Geoff Hunt, part of the team here at Connecting Genetics to Climate. This is the latest in our webinar series where we look at aspects of climate biotechnology. Um, if you have not joined us before, just a brief overview about us, and we'll put a link to our website in the chat. Our focus is on creating engagement, conversation, dialogue around biotech that is applied to climate change, whether it's mitigation or adaptation. We're really interested in hearing from different people across different sectors about the work that they do in this space. And our interest is really in bringing people together to have conversations about these different technologies at sort of an earlier stage rather than sort of the later stage after things have already gone down. And if you've joined us before, you know that we've had several of these webinars. Our most recent one back in February, we looked at some strategies for how to do effective public engagement around climate biotech, and a lot of those principles are pretty broadly applicable. So our conversation today with Christina Agapakis is going to sort of delve into that subject a little more deeply. We've got some topic ideas. Christina is going to talk a little bit about her thoughts, but we are going to have more of a conversation. So I'm sure she's going to say stuff that people are going to want to respond to. Put stuff in the chat, and once we have sort of an appropriate stopping point, then we'll sort of open up the floor and the mics. So Christina, take it away.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Um, oh, did my camera just change? You can hear me? Okay. Nice to see everybody. I'm excited to talk. Maybe I'll just start by just quickly introducing myself and the kinds of things that I do. I started out as a scientist, really like a bioengineer. I did a PhD in synthetic biology. I met Morgan back when we were both students, and we were beginning to actually work on these projects of how do we communicate about science, and how do we bring a bigger conversation. And the reason I was interested in that was because I wanted to solve climate change. And because I got to synthetic biology and bioengineering, for that promise of impact. But I saw this kind of weird thing happening when we thought about impact or sort of translation or solutions, right? We're oh, we're going to solve climate change, but people hate GMOs. And so it's or people don't understand that about science, and that's going to limit our ability to solve these problems. But at the same time, I also saw we didn't necessarily even understand the problem or the market or the things that needed to be done, right? So I was hey guys, climate change seems like a lot of politics here. Seems like we got to think about money, and everyone's oh, no, 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 don't think about that. That's somebody else's job, right? So on the one hand, I think we didn't really understand the full scope of the problem or the ways that technologies moved into the world. And we didn't really understand how people sort of took technologies or accepted them. And so we saw both things sort of as outside of our domain, and outside of the things that scientists could do. And so when I think about the kinds of things that we need to do in public engagement, or how we want to think about this, it's really critical to this question of actually translation impact, solving these problems. And I think it does have those two sides to it. What is the space? What is the market? What are the problems we're trying to solve? And then how does technology fit into those problem spaces? How are those tech things how do they move? How do they travel? How do they grow? How are these kind of opportunities made? And it's much, much, much more complicated than we usually think about it.
So with that sort of framing, if we sort of look not too far back, but sort of in the past, when we've had engagement around climate biotech, are there specific examples of things that you think have been done really well, or things that you think have not been done very well? And sort of what does that tell us about where we are now and where we might be going?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think it's maybe one thing that's really interesting or like interesting to it would be interesting to think through with you all. Like in some ways, I think the way that people have talked about sort of alternative proteins, like as a market, like as an opportunity, kind of is both the good and the bad at the same time. And it's sort of like rise and fall, like in the sort of market opportunity is maybe something for us to think about. Like, I'd say like a few years ago, like I remember what the lines going around the block outside of Burger King to buy Impossible Burger. And like that was like unbelievable, right? Like people are excited to eat like these explicitly GMO foods because they're going to be more sustainable. Like because like again, like we're sort of tackling these two stories at the same time. Like there's a problem that people can understand, a product that people want, like and it's not really about the technology anymore. We don't have to engage them in the molecular biology. We have to say just try it, taste it. It tastes great. Um, I don't like, but it does feel like there was like a gap. It's not enough to solve the problem, right? It's not enough to really change how people like these patterns of how people eat. It's not enough to really tackle it. And I think it also sort of like exposed an attack where again, like immediately after that, you have like a very coordinated like meat lobby attack on alternative proteins. It's not actually that healthy. It's processed food. Like oh, it's actually like, it's more expensive. They don't care about you, the consumer. Like, right? Like anyway, like I think those are interesting examples, like where there's kind of like controversy and uncertainty, and the path that those things have taken to market and the story of how they've traveled maybe looks a little bit different than the kind of simple, sort of straightforward, like we taught people about the science and they accepted it and it solved the problem. So maybe that's a good one to think about.
Yeah, and it's interesting you highlight this idea of sort of it's not quite, but like fear of sort of the unknown.
Hmm.
So I mean, what can we do to sort of overcome that? Rather, like you said, you can't just sort of show and say, like, here it is, like, go with it. Like, what's the next level to really get the acceptance of these kind of products?
I mean, they have to be great products. I think that maybe that's the sort of interesting challenge, right? Like I think uh actually here maybe I'll give a sort of another layer. Like I think that question of fear I think is how we often think about it again as scientists. Like we have a sort of sense that people are afraid of new technologies. They're afraid, especially of, in particular, of genetic engineering technologies. There's this kind of narrative of Frankenstein, and so therefore, like a lot of the engagement sort of centers on that fear, because we fear the fear that the consumer has. There's a scholar and Claire Maris wrote a paper called about synthetic biology phobia. So like we are afraid that people will be afraid, and so then we like structure a lot of our messaging of like, don't worry, there's no DNA in the final product. Like, don't worry, the organism is going to be contained in the tanks. Like, don't worry, it's going to be it's perfectly safe. But that doesn't necessarily like answer the actual concerns that people might have always. Like maybe sometimes it does. And so, like another sort of social science researcher that I love, Emma Froh, she's a good friend of mine, and she does this super interesting research on containment. And again, this question, like I think as scientists, again, we think about the fear, and then we think about technological solutions. Like we will contain the scary part, and then therefore you will love this product. And what they have shown through their research is actually like it's a much more like multi-dimensional like process that we go through to decide what kind of products we want. And so sometimes that like those kinds of containment questions and the technical containment is important, but rarely is it the main thing, right? So like often it is about like is there a real problem, like a niche problem that this is solving that a person who's going to pay money for something has? What are the other alternatives for solving that problem? Are you displacing something that matters to people or not? Like, are there other kinds of questions about like again, like how easy is it to use? How different is it? Like, what are the different kinds of things? So she gives these kind of two really interesting examples. Like on the one hand, you have things like the Terminator seeds, right? So like, oh, okay, I made a tomato that's engineered, but like it can't reproduce again. Like, so don't worry, it's not going to spread into the environment. It's perfectly safe. And it failed in the market for lots of reasons. Like it didn't taste as good. People actually didn't like the idea that the seeds would terminate and not be able to sort of be passed on. Like there was many other kind of factors. On the other hand, you have products like Z Biotics. I have mine up here. This is one of their probiotic. They turn sugar and turn it into fiber in your little drink. There's live genetically engineered bacteria in these products, and people buy them and drink them. And so like there's no technical containment. You're just drinking GMOs, but people love it because again, they also have a hangover cure, which I have somewhere here on my desk too. Again, it's like okay, well, I don't like hangovers not displacing anything particularly traditionally meaningful to me to to drink your drink versus whatever Gatorade. And like it's a sort of successful product on the market in comparison. And so I think it's quite interesting to kind of think about those again, like they're more multidimensional. There's like a design of great products, like and the communication around them is about like communicating to understand what those problems are and what those needs are and then like yeah kind of like sharing like how you solve that problem with the product in the story of it, right? And not hiding the fact that it's GMO, right? Like that's another thing that Zbiotics shows us, like it says proudly genetically engineered. It's part of their marketing. It's how they talk about the products. But it's not, but that doesn't interfere with the way that it solves the problem. In fact, it is how they solve the problem. And so I think it kind of reframes some of maybe the traditional kind of thinking of biotechnologists when we think about how to solve the problem. Those aren't exactly like a climate examples, but I think they sort of maybe speak to these kinds of things that matter when it comes to the products and the stories we can tell.
For everybody's listening, I want you to sort of think and see if there are examples that you have that you'd like to surface, because I'd be interested to hear other people's experiences, especially if you're working on something directly. Because a lot, I think what you're talking about, Christina, is just a marketing issue. And we've sort of said that for a long time, that science really has a marketing problem.
Yeah.
So do you think, I mean, not that that's sort of the simple answer, but if science, if technology had better marketing, like that, we would solve a lot of these problems.
Well, maybe it's important to like talk about marketing,
Yeah,
like
let's talk about
and
marketing.
unpack that word more because ironically, I have my like marketing textbook on segmentation on my desk right now that I was reading.
What a coincidence.
And what's interesting, what I think this book in particular and like many others can say is like marketing, like I think we can tend to think about it as like they literally use an example of it. It's the t-shirts, right? Like it's the logo. It's like how you kind of it's the slogan. It's the Google ad copy. And like that is certainly like part of the tactical work of marketing. But like marketing is the strategy. Like marketing has to come really, really far upstream of like, what is the market? Right? Like, what is the need? Like, who is the person who you are like speaking to, really? Like, you have to care about that person and their problems, and that is marketing. And so, like, maybe that's to me, like, the most important thing. Like, when you say like science needs more marketing, I think like people immediately might hear like, oh, yeah, like that's like, you gotta lie better. You gotta like like dress it up more. Like, um, but for me, it's like it has to be really upstream, like, and that is marketing. And so, like, maybe I'm trying to like do marketing for marketing, or I need to come up with a better word for it. But yeah, again, that's and so like it's really about like who it's for, why it matters to them, what's the problem we're going to solve, what are the other options that people have, and all of that has to be part of how you're building your technology from the first place, not just how you package it up at the end or decorate it or put it on a website, right? Like it has to be sort of foundational to the way that you're approaching the technology.
Yeah, and I think that's a mindset that we sort of have been using when we're thinking about this sort of early stage engagement rather than at the end. Like you have this product that you think is awesome, and it's just like, okay, everybody should adopt this and use it. Um, Megan, I don't know if you want to come off mute and sort of expand on what you put in the chat there about bio-based materials for building.
So yeah, I put in the chat here about bio-based building materials because this is a sweet spot that I've seen some good traction around talking about climate change to certain audiences, and then also just hitting home on like this wood-based non-wood composite material is actually 3 times stronger than wood, but it's not made with that, and it captures like 50% more carbon. So an example of a company, at least in North Carolina, that's doing this really well is called Planted Materials. And quite literally, they're growing a special type of grass, and that grass is then harvested. It captures, like, for lack of a better term, a crap ton of carbon. So it's really, really good at capturing carbon. Takes that into the grass, they compress it down into this plank material that's then replacing wood for building houses. And over in Durham, they've actually been using them to build new affordable housing units, which is incredible for social and scientific kind of responsibility. But then the kind of value proposition to the builders who are actually now contracting with this company is that, again, it's 3 times stronger, it's water resistant, it's fire resistant, and it's all produced locally. So they don't have to go super far for a supply chain to actually get that material to the build site. And the other ones I'm really excited about are things like bio-based cement, other areas for marine restoration that, again, have those kind of multi-purpose, whatever stakeholder group you're talking to, you're going to find some sort of value proposition to say, it might be a little bit more expensive up front, but it's going to last longer and it's going to offer all these other benefits. Not that it works every time, but that's just one area I've seen kind of be really exciting.
That's awesome. I mean, I think like you nailed it. I think like yeah, what is the reason that someone is going to choose it? Like there has to be a reason, right? Like it's if it's like this is worse and more expensive, like but maybe it has some impact in climate if you like if everybody used it, like it's just not doesn't matter, right? Like but I think yeah, like you're sort of hitting it exactly right. And so like what's really interesting what you're saying too, it's like maybe it's also sort of like the actually like a local supply chain first, right? Like can you sort of complete like have a complete product for a certain market, again, fill a niche, like support and sort of build on top of that. It's really cool. I have some bio-based cement. I have the necklace version from Biomason. This is part of my demos on my desk here. I think yeah, I think it's all really interesting. And again, it's a huge challenge too. Again, like to say like use these ones. It's like yeah, like again, especially when you're like it's more expensive and kind of weird. Like you like that's like one of the bigger challenges that I think a lot of these businesses have and trying to kind of build the technologies and get it to scale. And so like yeah, the more you can kind of get at that, yeah, the more you can get to the right niche, the right value props. That's exactly right.
It's gonna be a fun game to see like every example that comes up if you have
Do I
like a
have one? I
product
would
of
love
it
that.
like in
Let's
your
see.
office right there.
I do
Um,
have this is myoglobin that you can put like in the alternative proteins like my blood necklace vial.
yeah.
Yeah. So we covered a few of them so far. Um,
Nice. Yeah, Hasnain, you put something in the chat. Do you want to come off and give us more detail about that? Or if anybody
Yeah,
else?
for sure, for sure. Yeah, like for context, like I just got it into SynBio. I found the field amazing and I became an ambassador for iGEM, and I used to do sessions for local communities, right? Tell them what SynBio is, how exciting it is. I just went in and I was like, and I had an Impossible Burger in the US as well. So I was like, okay, this is going to be the new way of food. It is going to change the traditional supply chains that people have for food, right? And I was like, okay, but this will get people excited for about it. And they were like, nope, because their whole economies are based on the food chains that they have, the supply chains that they have. And they weren't like open to the ideas of this new way of bio-based production, taking away what their like economics are based on. So I was like, okay, I need to be more cautious and I need to have more humility as well. And what worked for me was like later changing the tone from a replacement to another option that they can potentially use as a way for producing food compared to just like complete telling them that this is going to be replaced what they have, this is better than what they're currently doing. So that kind of narrative kind of like helped me
better engage the local stakeholders too.
I think you're spot on, right? Like, and it sort of speaks to that thing, right? Like the reason that somebody be like, no, I don't want that is like not because they're afraid of the technology or like they need to understand molecular biology more. It's because it's actually like that's disrupting our local economy and way of life, right? Like, and so like if it feels like a threat, like of course you're going to sort of react to that, like rather than like, oh, it's another option, it's another kind of thing, or here's why you might want it again. Does it fill a niche, a need? Um, rather than saying like this is going to displace everything that you know and love and that it, like is fundamentally and like yeah, economically and culturally very important to you, like is a much harder conversation to have, and it doesn't matter how good your brand design is or how good your molecular biology education is.
Yeah. Justin, did you have something, or are you just coming on?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really cool. So many thoughts. Um, I think that in terms of built environment, Geoff, I know we talked a little bit about this before. We do like typically are responsible for like developing the ecology on a site in built environment context, which sometimes translates to like a landscape architecture world. And it's a shame. I think Melody, my co-director, is back there who can speak more pointedly to built environment. But there's, I think, a really like misunderstood question around who are the decision makers who would be specing some of these products. So we're in the position with, say, a development project to say, yes, we want, you know, that bio-waste cement in the facade, or yes, we're introducing these green roofs to accomplish X objective. You know, so yes, we're going to spec for bioacoustics, or we're going to spec for, you know, all these different kind of technologies, if you will. I think like that question of like who is making the decision for any emerging technology and any specifically around genetics, where again in the built environment there's a lot of gray area around regulatory systems and policies and what can even go in a space. So like there needs to, for me, there needs to be like more capacity building at that layer. That's one angle. I think then that of course becomes a question of like, you know, so for us on a project, it's we're then having to convince the developer, right, to say, hey, this is better for this way. But I think really, Christina, I think something that you're saying before that points out is like the narrative is the driver there. So the developer honestly doesn't care. That's not why they're building this project. It's our job to say, hey, if you know, introduce a green roof, it'll reduce your energy costs, or it'll reduce this, or maybe we can craft a story out of this that we can then layer on top of your development project, right? So in this project that I'm speaking to, we're starting to construct this narrative around kind of using the built environment as a catalyst to develop emerging technology, which is really a question of like, how do you scale something across a site? And I think that story itself is rich and can show up in many different places, especially in built environment, because it becomes very site specific. And I think like what is an agency or what is a group of people, or like what existing at that layer is a difficult one. And it's maybe a big challenge there is it's like an unexpected one, but I see that as like a pretty serious, Christina. I don't know. You're nodding, maybe you're, I'm kind of rambling here, but maybe you can comment on that too, of like trying to figure out how to operate in that space. Yeah.
Like you mean like operate in that space of like helping the decision maker and helping them sort of like tell the story, understand the constraints that they're under.
Yeah, I think it just exactly it just has like a really classic engagement challenge if there's lots of different stakeholders in the room and they're going to be different for each project, but
Yeah.
you've got to, you know, be in conversation with all of them. But most
Yeah.
of these projects don't typically have that moment where everyone is like at the table where you can introduce that conversation. It's like, hey, well, I think we should use X concrete or we should do this here.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a very particular kind of marketing, right? Like where like that's more in some ways, right? Like yeah, it's not about sort of like an individual consumer choice. It's like a little bit more that kind of like B2B sale, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, you're trying to again like reach someone who has a number of different constraints. They themselves want to tell the story downstream to their own customers. And so like in some ways, like you have to kind of tell it all the way, help them sort of articulate it all the way through. This is something like again, so I spent a long time doing marketing at Ginkgo. And like Ginkgo's B2B business, right? So like we do research with big companies, like help them outsource their research, and they're going to ultimately talk to their clients. And that sense of like that storytelling, like a lot of that was like working with the decision makers, as you're saying, like who are like, yeah, is this going to change my regulatory? Like, is this going to change? Like, are my customers going to be weirded out by this? Like, are they going to care? Like, are they to care or not? Like, what do they care about? Like, sometimes like you actually have to like be thinking about all of those pieces, like even when you're very far upstream. And so like I think you're right that it's very challenging. I'm not sure if I answered your question other than to say like you're right. It's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess also like with that challenges, I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's a lot of opportunity at that level, right? Like that I
Totally.
think is where the model can really, really change. And a lot of these technologies that are maybe rooted in the tools of in bio or, are, biotech for climate in what way can like really, really thrive overseas, perhaps. But yeah, thank you for
It
that
is like
response.
catalytic, right? Like that you can like if you one big project can kind of move the needle and help open up opportunity for others too.
Yeah, right. Because it's like a site, right? So it's like, yes, the green roof, yes, the building facade, yes, the living plants. Yeah, like there's so many different layers happening there. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, B2B means business to business. Which is the yeah, like that's like the lingo in the marketing. Yeah. So yeah, either you might sell directly to a consumer, like, hey, buy this hamburger. Like when you're at the grocery store, that's a B2C. Or you're actually selling to other businesses, like so a developer to like a food company that's going to then use your ingredient in their foods that they're going to sell to consumers, right? So like how that sort of how things kind of get to be used, who is deciding, that's a really big part of the way that you might think about again, like who are you, what are the different audiences that matter, like you were saying, yeah, stakeholders, like who are the people who are going to be potentially interacting with the thing that you're making the technology, who's deciding, who's at what level, who's going to pay you, what do they need, what are the different factors. So maybe I was saying like maybe one of the things again like if I can like one kind of like visual or like concept to kind of take away from this when I think about engagement, like I think again like we often have this very like linear, like first I will make the technology and then I will give it to my marketing person and they will put it on the website and then people will buy it and it will be done, right? Like and or like yeah, like I'm gonna do the technology and then like oh there will be like ethical and legal implications like downstream again, like there's a sense of like this is a very linear path that science has to take, but in reality it is always that kind of like multi-dimensional, like and exactly what you're saying, Justin, like it's never all at once everyone is in a room together and be like we have decided and like we have consensus, like it's you're just kind of being like there's a push and pull always. And so a lot of the work of kind of building these technologies is actually like how do you find a path through that push and pull? How do you make a choice? How do you test how do you experiment in a space when you're being pulled in multiple different dimensions? I think biologists maybe intuitively understand that like all things are happening at once inside of a cell. There's all these things. Once you change one thing, all this stuff is happening over here. Again, how do we kind of deal with that? That's actually like when you kind of zoom out, what it's like to also sort of build a technology to have an application in the real world. Like now all of a sudden you're thinking about consumers, you're thinking about stories, you're thinking about their businesses, you're thinking about regulatory, you're thinking about climate, you're thinking about, yeah, biology, um, all sorts of things.
So, so many things I want to sort of
He
go
frozen
into. I
more.
guess one froze again. I froze. That was me.
Okay.
That was me. Um, let's let's take this slightly different direction because we can come back to some other stuff. But like you talk this idea of sort of fear and trust. Like,
Mhm.
are like is synthetic biology, genetics, like climate, are those like how do those words fit into all of this? Like are those things you were talking about this before we jumped on of like should we just be like full board like yes, these things have GMOs in them. I was at the Synbio Beta conference a couple weeks ago, and like you could not like nobody was saying climate change, nobody was just saying sustainability. Um, so I'm just curious in terms of how we actually come up with these products, or we sort of come up with these paths. Like, is that sort of a secondary concern now?
Um, I think you're well, so like I think you raise another dimension. I think when you say like no one is saying climate and synthetic anymore, like that's different, I think, than people not saying GMOs. But maybe not. Like maybe it is. Like let's like unpack it. So I think I'd say like so I made these stickers and I would like hand these out to everybody. Because I do think that again like that fear of rejection of the GMO like causes us to do very silly things, I think, which is like hiding that it's GMO, like lobbying the government to make sure that it remains hidden whether or not something is GMO. And then like that like breeds of an environment of fear, I'd say, around it, right? Like, well, what, like, why are they hiding it? Like, what are they hiding? Is it not safe? Like, why aren't they telling me? Like, all of a sudden, again, like, because there's like a mistrust of like the public being able to make their own decisions about whether or not they want something like now like the person's like well I don't trust you back, right? And so like being able to talk about these things, how it's made, it's part of the whole thing. It's not enough by itself, right? Like I think yeah, like Z-biotics is great that they say probably genetically engineered, but it's not like why someone buys the thing unless they're at Beta, right? Like they buy it because it solves the problem and like they tell you about how it's made and you care about it, right? So like I think like you have that's the sense like that there's all these different features. So like it's necessary to use the terms to say what it is, just talk about how you made it. It has to be there, but it's not sufficient on its own. It has to also sort of solve the problem. I think on the climate change part, like you're saying, like, yeah, I think there's a sense, right? Like that again, climate change, sustainability as a value prop, like used to be it was never like fully sufficient, but it was like closer to sufficient, right? Like you could be like, this is good for the environment, and like all of a sudden people want it, right? Like I think now like that's very, very clearly is not borne out. Like it is not true that making something that's good for the climate, good for the environment, like is enough for a successful business to grow and thrive. And so I think like in the sort of downturn of like a lot of those business like of that market of businesses that have like struggled to raise another round, struggled to get to market, like struggled to tell their story beyond the climate opportunity, like there's a sort of like retraction like that, and people are afraid now of that domain. And so like maybe again there's a parallel, right? Like there's a sense that like okay there's a reaction where investors are not investing in climate solutions anymore. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear AI. They want to hear acceleration. They want to hear something else. And so people sort of like shift very quick and don't say climate. But I think that's not quite right either, right? Like if your thing has an impact in climate, like again, and that's what you care about, and that's what you're trying to do, like that's important, but it's just not enough to make a thriving, certainly not venture-backed business right now. And so like that's the dynamic that I think, and then why I think maybe there is more of a similarity than I thought immediately as you said your question.
Yeah, I'm curious if other folks have had a similar experience or not. I know Megan was at the Synbio beta meeting as well, so we talked about this a little bit. Sort of curious what other people's thoughts are on the usage of sort of climate change, environmental sustainability. Like, is that something people are finding that they're having challenges with? Are you still sort of going full bore? Any thoughts from the audience here?
Yes, totally. Synbio Beta was like, we are proudly GMO or proudly engineered. I'm like, great, love that because we really needed that like 15 years ago. But what I found interesting now, and I was telling Geoff this there, is that I can't say sustainability in any of the work I do. and I'm doing regional bioeconomy development in North Carolina that is a hub with alternative proteins left and right, and a Bezos Center for alternative proteins.
Yeah.
However, when we are trying to literally break that message down into, again, what are the value proposition components for our ecosystem and for our community? Sustainability is not what they care about necessarily, depending on who you talk to. And so I've been using a lot of resource resilience words of like, we are taking one man's waste and turning it into another man's input treasure and trying to find those better connections between what growers are growing to wasting less of that, but then also providing extra money for the growers. So trying to find those connections has been both really difficult and also satisfying to kind of find a workaround. So sustainability and kind of that environmental component is difficult to talk about. However, the only way I've been able to get around that is in the context of wastewater. And how are we actually navigating the water problem? In North Carolina, we have a significant amount of manufacturing, which is wonderful, and biomanufacturing, but it uses so much water that even now the companies that are large pharmaceutical manufacturers are thinking, oh shoot, like we can't drain this river, but it's really activated a part of our community that's in the environmental front. And I think it poses a great opportunity for folks like me who straddle that line of like, this is great. This is an opportunity to have those kind of corporates be responsible for their community impact and engage in a good conversation around why biotech can change for benefits.
Cool. That's great. I mean, anyway, that's awesome. I think that totally makes sense, right? Like, especially like it sounds like you're talking to farmers too. I maybe like a question or a question comment back to you. Like, I think like climate, like in ag in particular, also had some sensitivity, right? Where like funders sometimes were like, yes, like ag is obviously like a huge part of those like the pie chart of carbon and like greenhouse gas emissions and climate issues, like that is a place to target. But like if you're speaking to the growers, like that also like feels like a kind of vulnerability, or like again it's like an attack to them and their way of life. Like you are causing climate change. And they're like, hey, I'm trying to feed people. Like what the heck, right? And so
Yeah.
like it doesn't feel like a like, oh, like let's solve a problem together. Let's find a way to grow your business and
Yeah.
help you do things, right? Like it felt like when the climate framing in ag can again feel like
Yep.
yeah, it's a business attack. Yeah.
It's a question we're facing right now. And so I just put another example. Hopefully this is helpful to some people because this is how I've been learning in my job. But this company called Hoofprint Biome, they're a startup spin out of NC State. They're tackling that exact problem, Christina, of like, instead of telling farmers they're the problem, they are saying, we get it, and we're going to use biotech and synthetic biology to make your problem better and save you money. So they are bioengineering the microbiome of cows to reduce methane production in the gut where it's all happening. They like to say we're getting rid of cow burp, like harmful cow burps.
Yeah.
And they have raised significant amount of money because they are targeting not only the VC farm ag tech community, but they're talking to farmers. And they're doing an excellent job of kind of bridging that gap between the synthetic biology world and saying, this is just going to save you money and it's going to make sure your cattle are healthier. So it's been a really interesting concept.
That's cool.
I was in an event out here in LA last month for the LA Climate Week with some local farmers, and one of them was joking that one of their favorite games on his farm is to come up with different ways to reject the scientists who come up to them with their like latest and greatest solution for your farm about how we're going to, address climate change. And I think you're right. And not even that they feel attacked necessarily, but
Frozen again.
they've had so many sort of false prom what they're trying to sell. So I think it gets back to what we've been talking about of sort of there has to be some sort of trust and mutual benefit for all of this to be enacted. And we've talked about that with engagement. I mean, those are sort of core principles of engagement.
Yeah.
And I'm curious that, you wrote this piece about sort of the Asilomar conference that took place a couple months ago, where you sort of talked about some of the sort of the cliches and how those have been failing. I mean, we've been
Yeah.
talking about these tenets of engagement for a while,
Yeah.
and you sort of pointed out like where they still are falling short. Like, I don't want to necessarily rehash all of that, but like, where do you think that takes us going forward so that we don't repeat some of the mistakes that have happened in the past?
I think yeah, like so that was I I had like there's this concept right of the thought terminating cliche. And they're very common in sort of like culture building, right? And like cults and stuff, right? Like of like, well, like we have these patterns, like we say things, like we have these sort of like mantras almost, like that's like, well, everybody knows this thing, right? Like, and everyone's like, yep, we all know this thing, and like, and the kind of conversation ends there. And I think like what I'm always interested in, and especially when again like when I'm talking about marketing, like be curious about the work of marketing, like scientists, right? Like I think maybe a thought terminating cliche for a lot of people is like that's just marketing, and like again like you can just like end the conversation like of like well what are we selling to who like by just saying like that's marketing, that's not what I do, right? So again the sense that like there are things that we say culturally and like sort of like in the vernacular of our community that sort of stop us from being curious about why those things might happen. So like an example in the sort of food space and something you probably hear a lot is like oh, like we've been doing genetic engineering for 10,000 years. Actually, I have this is from Elena's lab in the biobat space. I have teosinte from one of project. So like this is what corn used to look like. So like and then there's like, over many years, there's been sort of a selection and breeding and like a relationship with corn and the land and the people that has like bred it into like all of these different kinds of varieties of corn. And so then people are like, we've been doing genetic engineering for 10,000 years. And that's meant to like stop us from asking more questions. But I think it's like, what an interesting thing to say. Again, so like the artwork that Alvaro was doing with the Teosinte is like, what does it mean for us to have been doing genetic engineering for that long? Like, what is the relationship that we have to this history, to its past? How is it different now? Like, why is it that people like see those different techniques as different? Like, are they? How? Like, what does it mean? Again, so I want those to be like opening opportunities to open up curiosity, like rather than close down conversation. And so like the other ones that I kind of see again frequently when we're talking about engagement or like that people kind of like use as almost like again like a gotcha, like we all know this and like you're the stupid one, is like, oh, why do you not want to eat GMO corn? Like it, but you would take like insulin that was made recombinantly. And again, it's supposed to be like a gotcha, like rather than like be curious. Why do they want to take insulin but not eat GMO corn? Like those are very different decisions, right? Like one is like I would die if I didn't take this, and the other one is like I can choose different kinds of snacks, right? Like and snacks that I prefer for many reasons. Like what are those reasons, right? Like that's what I mean. Like where again, I think the work that we need to do good engagement, to do good marketing, like is in having kind of curiosity to those kinds of questions, like rather than like ending the conversation at those points. So that's what I was sort of trying to show. Because I just like whenever you hang out again, like in the in-group of synthetic biologists, like I just hear those constantly when you're talking about like people don't understand. Like we all know we've been doing this forever. Don't they get it? And it's like, no, because they're actually trying to tell you something much more interesting and you're not listening. And so that's what I think what I want to get people to understand about engagement.
And just before I get to you, Justin, is there like an example from maybe a different field where that kind of thinking has been applied successfully?
Like being curious about your customers.
Yeah, just like how do you sort of
Any
it
field
rather
that
than
has a successful market, probably, yeah. I mean, so like the examples that you kind of, I mean, actually, there was a really beautiful conversation very recently. Morgan, as you're or Leonora, like, whoever's doing the like searching, there was a really nice conversation between Johnny Ive, who was designed the iPhone and the Mac at Apple, like, and Patrick Collison at the Stripe conversations. So there's a really, really nice conversation kind of like where Johnny Ive reflects on like what it means to be a designer, what it means to have designed these like really iconic objects that have like redefined our relationship to technology and to like and the whole economy. And so I think again, like those are great examples, right? It's like really like again, nobody said I want an iPhone, but they like went and like really understood like, well, what is possible? What could be opened up? Like, like yeah, people would say like, I don't need that. Like, I don't need spreadsheet. All kinds of things. Again, like, there's a lot of assumptions about like what it was that people wanted to do with technology, how it would be, and I think that the people like the best design, the best kind of products, like the things that really are sort of again like are held up as these like amazing testaments to ingenuity and design and innovation often are like opening up like really deeply curious and really caring. That's what I think why I mentioned the Johnny Ive conversation. Like he really talks about like you have to care about the person and the experiences that they're going to have. Like he talks about like designing like the paper that wraps the cord in the iPhone. And it's like, it could be anything. It could be wrapped in plastic, but like that person who opens it up like will know you cared about them. I'm like that feels very special and like not how we talk in biotech at all, right? Like, and so I do think the sort of like especially consumer, and like especially like the design community, and consumer spaces, I think like really does take that deeply to heart.
Thank you. Allison, you have your hand raised.
Hi. I actually had like I'm kind of curious on sort of like a flipped question to what we've been talking about. So I feel like I come from an environment where a lot of biotech focuses on more like medical and human health applications, and climate tech is kind of seen as more like a tough tech problem, where like
Mhm.
physical science and like engineering solutions are have like the most promise, and biology is probably like more reserved for medical applications. So I'm wondering if anyone has any comments on just like addressing the role of like synthetic biology in climate, and like would you give specific examples when talking to people who have this mindset, or just like frame the conversation in a different way. But I found that like when I've talked to specifically like venture investors, they're either like in the tough tech climate tech side or they're on the biotech side. And like there's not a lot of in between. And maybe that's just the people that I've talked to. But yeah, I'd love to like if anyone has tips on like bringing them together.
Maybe can I ask follow up? Like, what is the context of your question like because you're raising money for bio in climate and then you're finding like because like the bio people don't really get the climate and the climate people don't really get bio, like it's hard to kind of be at
Yeah,
that section.
yeah, kind of. Yeah, I'm not like actively raising money, but I'm interested in the intersection of
Yeah.
those two in like an investing space, or maybe like a startup area. And I've kind of find that like they feel like two different uh populations that I'm talking to and not like one. And maybe I'm just not talking to the right person, but yeah.
Maybe that, I mean, back to my market segmentation, like that sounds like market segmentation, right? So like of the investor class, right? Like there's people who are really familiar with like life science businesses, like and like the drug process, right? So like they're like, I fund drugs. And so like I'm going to look at the research, like how likely is like how good is the target? Like how, how big is the market? Like there's like a calculus for how to invest in drug companies. And so like if you're talking to like an investor who's like a drug investor, they might just not be the right audience for you actually. Right? Like, because like they don't really understand like the business or the product that you're in. And so like even though they're like a life science investor, they don't really get it, right? And so like there are niche investors, I'd say, and like people who are like, who have sort of now experience in synbio over the past 15 years. And like that's the segment that you need to talk to on the bio side. On the tough tech side, they might be looking at bio and be like, I mean, like I've seen a lot of failed companies. Like I've seen like I don't where's the money, right? Like where's the impact? Like bio is too squishy. It's not durable carbon removal. So you have to kind of prove to them something different, right? So again, it's more about like yeah, like there may not be that sort of perfect unicorn, or if there is, like there's few of them, and you could, if so you want to find that segment of the perfect unicorn. I know some people. You should talk to Juniper if you haven't talked to Juniper VC. They're great. They have that problem too. They're like, we want to raise money from LPs, but we're like bio but not pharma, and like that's their niche, right? And so like they struggle with that message too, because like how do you sort of find? So you have to find people who care about the thing and then speak to them in their language is kind of so like it is a little bit about like mapping the landscape and then like okay, what are the things that might cluster to them together? What are then like the kind of non-linear storytelling that you have to do to sort of show all of those different facets of who you are to those different audiences. So yeah, it's not easy is the answer, but I think but that's the work. Yeah.
Megan, real quick, and then Neil.
Yeah, I mean, Allison, I think that's an excellent question that I actually see all the time here. So, again, with my company examples, so I think the really nice way to connect human health into this kind of climate conversation, one, at a bare minimum, increased inclement or severe weather challenges pose a great public health threat to communities. Loss of access of clean water, sanitation, all of the above. So I think that's where you can think of where engineered microbes for environmental release kind of come into play. How can you help clean up, PFAS? How do you clean up waste from mines? All of those areas, bioremediation is a really interesting kind of place for that too. But I also think for this particular company example, they started making synthetic biology or like synthetic collagen. They were trying to do that for to replace what we're normally using for some collagen, which is kind of gross sometimes. And they were doing it for food and they were targeting, the vegan population. Didn't raise a lot of money on that platform. So they switched to kind of, okay, guess what? We can still make collagen, but use it for human stuff. And so that's where they're really targeting the biomedical market. And I think the regenerative medicine space in general is a really good place where we're seeing a lot of more sustainability focused research because the whole part of regen med is to make sure that you can regenerate something that you need to. But even with kind of synthetic platforms for cell food, media, those sorts of things are being developed fast. And I think that's kind of a nice sustainability play. But you're totally right. These are very two different markets that don't talk to each other all the time, and we need more of it.
Neil.
Hi. I have another dimension that I think gets missed a lot in the bioclimate space that like using biology or GMOs or things for climate change is like not a new idea. And maybe in a negative way, the track record is actually pretty bad. So the funders, a lot of them like this isn't like new to them, like biofuels, algae, like none of that scaled. Biobiology's like not been that helpful for cleaning up the environment. So I think that's worth considering too, that like there's a bit of momentum in this space right now, but a lot of it is like frankly hype and it's to be seen yet, like which of the latest stuff proves to be kind of real and scalable. So I do think I think like, yes, the marketing is like critical, right? Like you must, that is a requirement for success, but also a requirement for success is having a technology that works, which is sometimes not easy to see at the beginning.
I would I love yes. Good spicy prompt. No, I think my argument right now is like I think uh so like there are right we started 20 years ago saying like we're gonna make biofuels, we're gonna save the world, right? Like this is where I started, like in Pam's lab, right? Like it's saying like it's gonna be awesome, we're gonna make, and then I'd be like, wait, it's not gonna work, right? Like the market is different, like, and so even if you had like the best, even if you hit the theoretical maximum of what biology could do, like it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work in the system. Like that's like also marketing, right? Like what is the product? Like what is the thing? Like what's the market look like? And so
Yeah.
that's why everyone pivoted to like, oh, let's do cosmetics, like with the same pathways. And so again, like those technologies worked. They scaled like incredible. Again, like they hit the theoretical maximum. It's just like nobody, it wasn't at like a techno-economic level, didn't work. So like again, like the technology works, it scales, but it doesn't scale to solve the problems that it was like targeted at necessarily
Mhm.
at first. And so like again, it's part of like the balance between the problem and the technology and the like all of those things have to work together. And so you're exactly right. Techno-economics.
Can
Buzzword for the
I
day.
Yeah.
can I throw in one thought there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, one last thought and then
Cool.
we will wrap
Yeah.
up.
I just think like generally this in terms of engagement, activation, whatever marketing, this space needs so much more that is in person and happening live and is exciting to be there and be involved in the conversation or gets people excited to be there. Like I think that, you know, to your point, like the technology has to work, of course, like and you know what should be like some of the most badass like events that you could attend? They should be about like TEAs. They should be about techno-economic analysis. Like I think that there's levels of engagement that like we're talking very like end use. So we're talking like we're scaled, it's people who are buying in or specing or whatever. But I think some of the best engagement or activation can happen is like way, way, way upstream to like what you guys are referencing. Like, hey, what does it look like to do a TEA event? What does it look like to like do
Engagement
workshopping
for
within the
scientists,
lab?
not be so academic and to make.
Exactly. And expanding the definition of the scientist so that other people are in the room, like more emphasis on the room as a whole, less like the final product. And
Mm.
then what happens if we're like way upstream with that activation or marketing or whatever engagement, rather than like focused on this kind of, you know, B2B or B2C conversation that of course is important, but there's like bigger questions like, I'm sorry, I missed your name, Neil had just brought up. Yeah, that's my thought there.
Maybe it is like as a closing thought, like public, like success, right? Like solving some of these problems in climate change, like building great technologies, like is not actually gated first and foremost by public acceptance, which is like often again like where we kind of like almost like blame that. Like it's like an excuse, like, oh, my technology is not working because people don't like GMOs. Like, and that's like because the education system has failed. And so what we need to do again, like it's a thought terminating cliche. It's not like looking inward of like, well, what am I doing? Like, who is it for? How am I solving the problem? Like, what is the real problem? And so that in fact, like what's gating the success of these technologies, like is much, much more integrated. It's not this kind of downstream thing that we don't have much control over. It is even upstream of like, yeah, what are we trying to do in the first place?
Awesome. We'll make that the final thought. So thank you everybody for attending and participating. I think we got some really interesting threads out of this that we have a lot to chew on as we sort of move forward, and hopefully everybody else does as well.